Thank you for tuning in to Growing Tech Fast, the condensed Org3D podcast in which conversations about growing tech startups are had with those who have grown them. Today, I am joined by Dan Simpkins, CEO and co-founder of Dwellwell Analytics. Dwellwell is disrupting the prop tech space. They're a check engine light for the home, and we will dig into what that means later. But from 2018 to earlier this year, they were in stealth mode. They're out in the public now and they are proving success. And I am really delighted to have these guys on. Firstly, Dan, it is great to have you. Very warm welcome, but please do a better job than me and introduce yourself.
Great. Well, it's really a pleasure to talk to you today, Rosie. I'm Dan Simpkins. Of course, I'm CEO and co-founder of Dwellwell. It's really a pleasure to be here. We are a tech startup in the real estate sector. We are based in the Washington, D.C. area of the U.S. And frankly, for your listeners, although I live in D.C., I do a great job of avoiding politics. So I'm excited to talk about tech today.
Brilliant. Well, look, what I want to dig into right at the start is a little bit more about you, understand where your brain comes from, what path you've been on. So tell me a little bit, like, let's go back early career. Where did you start out at?
Right. So I'm a degreed electrical engineer. I started, I have both an undergraduate and graduate degree in electrical engineer. Early in my career, I really had a fantastic opportunity. I had some great jobs. I managed at a really critical time to get into the telecommunications area and became an expert in a really important part of telecommunications that ultimately formed the foundation of the infrastructure that created the internet or allowed the internet to flourish. So it was a really exciting time to start my career. Early, I made a transition. I actually was able to make a transition into entrepreneurship. It's kind of a fun little story. It's one of those stories that in hindsight, it's a good story to tell, but at the moment, it wasn't really that much fun. As I said, I was in telecommunications. I had worked early in my career at a startup. I got a startup experience, developed expertise in wide area communications and went to work for a new company. At that company, I was the co-CTO, one of the principal engineers there. And tragically, not too long after I got there, the CEO who had hired me to disrupt the way the company did engineering passed away. He actually developed cancer and passed away. It was very tragic. And the company went into a little bit of a political tailspin. And I wound up finding myself on the wrong side of the politics. You could see a trend here, I think. The wrong side of politics. And I actually got fired, which was to go from sort of the top of my career. And all of a sudden, I was sort of in this, oh my God, what just happened? I just got fired. That turned out to be the best, really a defining moment for my career, because I decided, having grown up in an entrepreneurial family, both my parents and grandparents were entrepreneurs, I decided that I wanted to start my own company. And so I was able to start Salix, my first company, which became a leader in telecommunications over time and really helped launch my career. And it's interesting because as an entrepreneur, I have a saying that you have to go over the line to see the line, right? And so this is really important because essentially what that means is you have to go over the line of science fiction. You have to imagine yourself in the world of science fiction and then kind of turn around and see where the line is and then figure out, how can I move that line forward? How can I turn science fiction into a reality? And that's essentially what I've done throughout my career. First at Salix, where we pioneered voice over the internet, which we're actually using, current generation of that technology right now. And then after I sold Salix, my first company, successfully, I founded Hillcrest Labs, which was a really important transformation because we saw if voice was on the internet, eventually video would come to the internet. And we would want to create the technologies that would be helpful for consumers who were then going to be bombarded with an explosion of content. And that's ultimately what led me to create what we now call Smart TV at Hillcrest. So that was some of my early successes, and what's really and of course now what I'm doing with Dwellwell is another whole story, which maybe we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's I particularly like the thing about going over the line to see the line. It makes a lot of sense to me. It sounds like you have been like right at the forefront of things when things have just been ticking over into a new era of technology. When you look back over the last couple of things and the companies that you've worked at, and what you've built, can you pinpoint something that was like when you then were reflecting? So you were looking back, not necessarily to find the line, but just looking back and having a reflect. Can you pinpoint something that was like, wow, this was really cool, and it gave you the inspiration for the next thing?
Yeah. Well, I've had that multiple times throughout my career. And let me give you two, I like to call those inflection points. Where are those career inflection points? At Salix, I basically was at the center of the expansion or the transformation of the telephone network from a wired base using copper to fiber, to optics. So I wound up creating in the mid 90s one of the first high-speed fiber optic platforms, and that would enable large amounts of information to be transported over the telecom backbone. And in that process of making that technology, it started to become clear to me that the internet was going to be capable of doing much more once the network was expanded, was scaled to support massive amounts of traffic as it is today. And so that then started to make me realize that if the internet, which is this sort of web network that is highly interconnected and very resilient and robust, if it actually ultimately succeeds, then almost all communications are going to move to that network that will first have voice and then ultimately have video and and beyond. So so this moment when I delivered this first high-speed fiber optic system that no one had done before, and realizing that had the capability of really changing the way telecommunication happened, that was an epiphany. That was like that moment of, wow, something big just happened. And that enabled me to think about what came next, which was starting to put the typical phone calls, voice on the internet. And then ultimately, it actually, following the trend lines, let us think about what would happen when video came to the internet. And so each of those moments signaled a different entrepreneurial inflection point for me. The first point, the move from a wire to fiber, let me see the path to voice over IP. And the second point, from putting voice on the internet successfully, let me see that inflection point from voice to video and ultimately to what we have today. So
Pretty cool. So what was the inflection point, or like, what was the turning point for you when looking at Dwellwell? Where did the idea come from?
Well, that's a completely different inflection point. It's so a natural transition in our conversation. So I was running Hillcrest at the time. Hillcrest, after the financial collapse in 2008, pivoted and shifted our business focus. Hillcrest created originally Smart TV. Today, for your listeners, if you have a television made by LG, it is largely based on a significant part of what Hillcrest developed in our Smart TV platform. And one of the things that we had developed was the technology to do 3D control, to essentially put a mouse on television. In order to do that, we became an expert in sensor technology. And so after 2008, when the financial recession occurred on a global basis, Hillcrest pivoted and started to focus on delivering sensor technology to the consumer electronics industry rather than the entire television platform. And so over time, we became not only expert in building sensor-based technologies, but also in AI and algorithms that would be applied to that sensor data. Okay, so that's the foundation. And what was the inflection point? Well, it was simple. It was personal. I have a house that is a remote house. The house, it was a cold winter about 8 years ago. 2 pipes froze in the house. And when the pipes thawed, the house flooded and was hugely damaged, almost destroyed. And a matter of fact, we got a call from somebody who arrived at the house and said, hey, Dan, I just arrived at your house and water is coming out the front door. That's not a good day.
No.
Not a good day. And so I then spent a year putting the house back together again. And I started to think about this. And consequently, I made an observation that there are hundreds of millions of cars on the road, and all of them have a check engine light. Right? And the check engine light tells you what's going wrong, hopefully before you get stuck on the side of the road, right? But none of the homes, certainly our focus is the US today, but on a global basis, no home has a check engine light. And so I turned to my my chief technology officer at the time, and I said, hey, we are experts in sensors and we're experts in algorithms and AI. We're going to make a check engine light for homes. And he said, whoa, that's a great idea. It's not really anything that we're doing today. And so we started to think about it. Consequently, we sold Hillcrest. We had an offer it was a venture-backed company, so we sold it. And after we concluded the transition, we got together and said, you know what? No one is doing this. This is a really cool idea. And so we started on our third entrepreneurial journey.
And again, really cool. It's just such a, I think what I really like about your story, and one of the things that when we were planning the podcast, I found really, really interesting was that it is so thoughtful. It's not your typical kind of fell into it, or I just, somebody introduced an idea to me and I thought it was really good, so I ran with it and it's worked. This has been something that you've really sat there and thought about and come up with an idea. And again, second thought to when we were planning the podcast was, I haven't heard of this before, and it sounds like something that I don't know somebody who doesn't need it, which is a great business idea. If you can't think of somebody on the planet who doesn't need something, then it's definitely a good idea. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it works? So from somebody listening in who is, completely out of the loop when it comes to check engine light and the theory behind that.
Right. This is an important question, and I'll try to keep it brief because it's easy to get into the weeds. It starts with this. It starts with this device. So this is just an example of one of our sensors. I can comfortably say this is one of the most sophisticated IoT or Internet of Things sensors ever created for homes, for residential applications. So we created this sensor in order to collect data in the home about the ambient environment. And that's important because we wanted to make a product that anybody could use. We didn't want to make a product that required a professional to come and install it. We didn't want you to have to call a plumber or an electrician or an heating and cooling service person. We wanted you to be able to just plug in the device, just plug it into an outlet, an electrical outlet, and start collecting data. And that technology we call ambient inference. So it's our form of AI. So it's measuring the ambient environment and determining from those measurements what's happening in the home. So we start with the sensor. What we did when we built the company is we wrote down all of the things that could go wrong in a residential space, whether it's a single family home or a multifamily. And so we wrote a big database, and then we determined what sensors would we want to put in this device in order to collect information that we could then use to help our customers better understand their the homes and what's going on. And so we define the sensor set, and then we take all of those ambient streams, whether it's simple like temperature or more complex like vibration, and we put it into an AI system, a true deep learning AI system. So we actually have designed our own neural network, our own software structure that analyzes those streams and then provides information that is actionable, because that's the most important thing. We want the information to be actionable. And so the technology at the surface is simple. Sensor, streams feed an AI, which figures out what's wrong and gives the users an alert that says the toilet is running or the furnace is not working efficiently. And
how's that serviced up to somebody? How would they see that?
Yeah, so they see it in one of three possible ways. They can get a text message, an SMS or a text message to their phone. They can get an email alert that gives them a little bit more information, or they can log into our dashboard, our website. We have specifically for each customer their own web experience where they can log in and they can get more information. They can drill in deeper and see more data. So at the top level, they're just getting actionable alerts. There's something broken. There's a water leak. The furnace is broken. There is an appliance that has a recall notice. There is excess noise in an area. Maybe there's an air quality alert. So these are alerts, and they just then are given some information to help them know what to look for. Or they could look at the actual data and decide, how do I use that data in order to diagnose and fix the problem?
One of the things that I find really interesting about this, and I mentioned it earlier, is I can't think of somebody who wouldn't benefit from somebody like this, but who at the minute are Dwellwell's customers? Like, who are you targeting?
Yeah, so we are, so today our focus is in the US, right? All startups, you start regionally. Every company I've built has always been a global company. Interestingly, at Hillcrest, 95% of my business was outside of the US, which was nice. And I've always worked on a global stage, but today we're starting in the US. Our focus initially are people who own homes they don't live in. So people who own homes they don't live in, they're the ones at risk. So in particular, if I narrowed that focus, these are institutional owners. They're people who own businesses that own real estate, right? So the owner-operators of residential real estate. Why does this matter? Because in the US alone, maintenance of residential buildings is over a $100 billion a year business. Just in the US alone, over $100 billion. And those costs are growing. Now, post-pandemic, we have supply chain issues, we have labor shortages, so they can't get necessary staff. And so we are, our value proposition is that we are providing a mechanism for the facilities managers to see inside the homes, to find issues early before the residents complain, before there's something broken. or to be able to be proactive. So one of the most important ways that our customers think about what we're doing is that they want to convert reactive maintenance, something breaks and you fix it, to proactive maintenance, to make it a more planned process. And when you have real estate at scale, if you own thousands of units, that problem becomes much more acute.
And not that $100 billion market isn't big enough, but what let's say that's dominated and you've nailed that market. Do you have plans to go outside of that? Is it finish this and get as much as we can in the US and then go global?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, residential real estate is the largest asset class in the world. $350 trillion asset class. So it would be somewhat foolish of me to stay in the U.S.
Yeah.
And here's the nice thing about what we've done. So interestingly, the market that we've looked at sort of as our second market is really both the UK post Brexit and the EU. And so those markets are very logical for us because there is a similar business climate to the U.S. and obviously access is a little bit easier than in some of the other markets like the Indian market or the Asian markets. And of course, it's not quite as cost sensitive. So we'll go to the European market next. The beauty of ambient inference. This is what's beautiful about it is we're basically looking at the ambient environment. So short of changing the plug, right, to go to a different type of plug, essentially having an adapter, I don't have to do much to go into those markets. I don't have to have something fit a different electrical system or a different plumbing system or HVAC system. And that's so yes, we will go after these other markets, but we want to. Our process is starting in the U.S. With the institutional owners, then moving to consumers in the U.S., and then moving to institutional owners in parallel with that in Europe and the UK, and then moving to residential customers in those markets. So it's sort of a stepping stone approach to our markets.
Got it. And going back to the product for a second, because it looks as simple as literally plugging it in. Have you got any plans from the product's perspective of taking that a step further? For example, if somebody was to buy Dwellwell and sign up to you guys and sign up to the platform, when they get the product in, is it just they plug in one? Do they plug in a couple? How does that work?
The way that Dwellwell works is that each sensor covers about 300 to 400 square feet. So it's in a typical one bedroom. You might have in a one bedroom apartment or flat, you would have 2 or 3 of these devices. As the residential spaces increase in size, the beauty of it is they just scale. It just scales from there, and so we can add sensors to it. So a baseline implementation will generally start with 2 or 3 sensors and one of our AI hubs.
Got it. Okay. What I want to go into, which is what I think is the really exciting part about this, is the concept of being more proactive for the people who will be your customers. At the minute, everybody is fairly reactive, and that reactive is extremely costly. It's damaging for their business because if it's a really bad situation like the one you had, tenants have to leave. If they're long-term tenants, or you're then in a situation where not only do you have to fix it and it costs you loads of money to fix it, but you then are also not able to put somebody in there for that time that you're trying to fix it. So all of this reactive work is extremely costly. When your customers who have been using the initial product so far, what have been some of the things that they've seen the value in? What's worked for them? What have they found?
The process of using the product is somewhat evolutionary or layered. They generally will start small, and then over time they'll get more sophisticated with how they'll use it. We've had some amazing success stories, and this point that you just made, you illustrated really nicely about the value of moving from reactive to proactive is really important, right? Because think about when does the furnace or the air conditioner fail? Well, the air conditioner fails on the first heat wave, and it always seems to be on a weekend, right? Right. And the furnace fails, on the first cold snap, and it always seems to be in the middle of the night, right? And so what we have been able to do is identify cases where we give our customers as early a warning as possible, in order for them to act before something becomes costly and catastrophic. At the beginning of the product, still a lot of what we're doing is enabling reactive maintenance, but reactive maintenance instantaneously. So they have the earliest information, maybe even before the tenant knows about it. So what are some of the things that we've seen? We have a multifamily building where we were able to identify numerous electrical problems, where there were safety issues. There were actually wiring problems that could have caused fires. So those were some of the things. We identified a really serious issue that enabled us to be proactive. We noticed through our alerting system that an oven was generating a large amount of carbon monoxide, dangerous levels of carbon monoxide. The carbon monoxide detector in the unit was not triggering, was not alarming, but our product did. So we were able to show the landlord, we show the facilities manager actually, that the stove was faulty, and they were able to replace it before a resident got sick or maybe worse. That was a really significant success. Numerous water leaks. We've been able to identify water leaks early before they expand into something more significant. Mold. We've been able to identify challenges in homes where there were conditions that would generate mold before the mold was so extensive that the home required a costly remediation. So we've had really an enormous number of successes across almost every facet of our product, and generally, some of those have been very much proactive, like the CO, the water leak, the mold. Those are all proactive. We're telling you something, we're telling our customers something before a crisis occurs, before somebody gets sick, before there's mold that has to be a costly cleanup, a water leak that's early before it affects multiple units or is flowing out the front door like my house. And then other cases, it's just reactive. It's still, hey, we're telling you right away that there's something that just happened, but we're giving you the most advanced warning that you could get.
Yeah, I think that's what's really key is even when you're doing it reactively, you rely on the tenant telling you, or that you have to rely on you going and checking the property. And there'll be situations where you might be on holiday and you might not have a tenant there. And that it could be a 2-3 week period where if you have a leak, something's got to happen, but you need to know about it. And there's a situation where it's not going to. I think the other side of this that I think actually makes it even more of an important product for somebody in this world to consider is it can be incredibly lucrative to be in property and to be renting out property. All of that different world, commercial, whether it's commercial or residential, it can be incredibly lucrative. But it is, it's a huge responsibility from a legal perspective. It's a huge responsibility from the fact that people are living in where you are, or they're spending all of their working day where in a place which you own. In the UK, there have been situations in recent years of where there are things which, as somebody who owns that property, you can't detect them. You don't know about them. They aren't things that are visible to the human eye or that are obvious when you're walking around somewhere. But in owning the property, you are the one responsible for it. And when it goes wrong, there are several situations where it's on your head. And that's where I think where Dwellwell comes in, and is that let's hope that the water doesn't come flooding out your front door and that it's not a terrible situation like that, but just simple things like mold. Tenant's got to tell you about it. If they don't and they get sick, it's still your responsibility. It's not the fact that they didn't tell you. And something like this, as a preventative, as a proactive measure, I mean, I think everybody should have it. I think it's a great idea. It's brilliant.
Well, I really appreciate it. That's the kind of enthusiasm we want from our customers. There is something else that's really important in this process, that we want to make the process of maintenance also more efficient. We want to save money. We want to save on electric bills. We want to save on water waste. In this environmental, with the environmental challenges that we have, obviously we want to save there significantly. And then the point you made earlier, which is also extremely important in that legal point, is insurance. Insurance costs are going up because we're constantly seeing catastrophes happen that then have to be resolved legally. If we think about in the US, we had this apartment building in Florida that collapsed and many people died, where if they had known that there was a problem, they could have resolved it for far less money that it would cost them in the legal bills after that. And so these are, we think ultimately this is the kind of technology that has to go everywhere. That you won't someday, just like today, you wouldn't buy an automobile, you wouldn't buy a car without a check engine light. Someday you won't buy a house without Dwellwell. That's where we see the business going.
I love it. Well, one of the things that as a tech recruiter in the tech startup world, one of the things that we always get asked about is, like the product sounds amazing, the concept is fantastic, but what is it like to work for them? It's one of the questions I want to ask you. Like, I love talking to you. I think it's great. And in the podcast planning, every conversation I've had has been really interesting, and you can tell that everybody genuinely cares a lot. And it's one of the things I want to ask. What is a day in the life of working at Dwellwell like?
What? Very intense. Very intense, but very fun. So culture is something that's really important to me. It's a question that I appreciate you asking me about, and I will say send people our way because it's a tough recruiting environment. But I've been running companies for a long time, and I have many people who work for me at Dwellwell who have worked with me for many, many years, decades even. Just right before this podcast, one of my mechanical engineers came to pick up something from my house. I'm working at my house today, and he has worked for me for all three of my companies. Wow. And so, what is a day in the life? A day in the life is has many facets. It is challenging. It's intellectually stimulating. It can be frustrating when you can't solve a problem that you know needs to be solved. It could be exhilarating when we solve a problem that no one has ever solved before. And it's just in general fun. The team, everyone gets along. It's a small team, but it's a highly motivated team. Even our contractors, we have many contractors, and they are they are as motivated and as bought into what we're doing and the mission of Dwellwell as any of our internal employees. So I would just say overall that working for us is just a lot of fun.
Good. Well, if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what will. I have really enjoyed this conversation. One of the things I like to close off these podcasts with is a key question. Somebody listening, if they only take away one thing, what would you like them to take away from this podcast?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate you giving me the time today. It's been a lot of fun, and certainly love to do it again. There is I'm going to give a shout out to a woman who runs a podcast herself and also writes a blog. Her name is Stacy Higginbotham, and Stacy, in her recent newsletter, Stacy on IoT, wrote about the challenges with smart home devices. And this is brand new. I just read this yesterday. And she said, I don't need my devices to bombard me with 1 million notifications about movements detected or doors unlocked. I need a way to customize the information I find relevant and have that surfaced in a glanceable manner. Alerts should be based on things that need my attention, not excuses to try to engage me with an app. And that was music to my ears. When she wrote that, it became clear that what I'm doing at Dwellwell is the right thing. What we're doing is we're generating data. We're not just delivering the data to our customers, but we're processing that data in a meaningful way to give our customers specific insights that they can use to address their most challenging problems. And from that, we're changing the calculus for residential maintenance. And that's exciting.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dan. This has been great.